SpaceX is getting ready for Starship's next flight, Russia launches a capsule full of mice, NASA receives the last piece for its big SLS puzzle, and Webb finds a new moon around Uranus. As always, we'll have all that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. Alright, we'll get to Starship in a second, but first, let's focus on some upcoming moon missions. NASA is making some great progress, and we might actually get back to the moon sooner than expected. The final piece for Artemis II's SLS rocket arrived at the Kennedy Space Center this week. Now, as you probably know, Artemis II is NASA's forthcoming mission to launch astronauts on a path around the moon for the first time since the early 1970s. We've been following along throughout the process as NASA has been preparing for this mission. The last piece to arrive in Florida was the Orion stage adapter. Now, this is a tapered aluminum cone that will connect the Orion spacecraft to the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS. It was manufactured at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, which it left for Florida earlier this week. Besides the all-important role of making sure that the spacecraft fits on the rocket, the stage adapter serves a secondary purpose. It carries a few CubeSats, which it will release after Orion separates. Artemis II will bring along with it 4 small satellites, all provided by international partners. South Korea, Germany, Argentina, and Saudi Arabia all provided a CubeSat to hitch a ride to the moon on the Orion stage adapter. Teams at NASA are working to get the rocket ready for flight as soon as possible. While SLS is being worked on in the Vehicle Assembly Building, or VAB, Orion is receiving its launch abort system in a dedicated facility at Kennedy. Currently, the mission is ahead of schedule, and its launch is currently scheduled for no later than April 2026. But if all goes well, it could fly as soon as February. If you want to see if NASA will manage to stay on schedule, tune into future episodes and subscribe to our channel to make sure that you won't miss it. And if you like our space news coverage, there's a button for that too. Meanwhile, NASA is already preparing for the mission after. If flying around the moon isn't exciting enough, the goal of Artemis III is to actually set foot on the lunar surface. Now, this mission will still happen some time away, and many things need to be prepped before it can launch. But NASA's working on it. A few weeks ago, we reported on the first pieces arriving at the VAB, the engine section and the so-called boat tail that will protect the sensitive engine hardware from the heat of launch. NASA has now mated the 2 parts and lifted them into High Bay 2, where the full SLS core stage will be assembled. This process will play out over the next several months, and the stage is expected to be completed in spring of next year. Now, one of the things that still has to be completed before Artemis III is ready to fly is the spacesuit that the astronauts will wear during their moonwalks. This suit is developed by Axiom Space, and it's called AXEMU, short for Axiom Extravehicular Mobility Unit. Recently, Axiom completed the first series of tests at NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab. During the test, astronauts suited up and entered a pool to test the suit in a simulated lunar gravity environment. This series of 3 tests validated that the AXEMU can handle the reduced gravity and remained airtight, which all went swimmingly. Now, if you want to know more about NASA's giant training pool and how it helps astronauts to prepare for spacewalks, and now moonwalks, you are in luck, because earlier this week, Doss and I toured the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, and we got a behind-the-scenes look at the facility, including the area where the moonwalk testing took place, all while actual astronauts were training for a spacewalk. And there's even more. While we were in Houston, we also got to try on an actual spacesuit. Not the AXEMU, but a prototype of the latest suit from ILC Dover, the company behind the Apollo suits and the ones that are currently used for spacewalks on the International Space Station. It's a great watch if you want to know more about spaceflight's most fashionable outfits. SpaceX is preparing for the 10th flight of Starship, and there's a lot riding on this flight. Starship's 10th flight will try to carry out the same objectives that were set out for the previous 3 flights of Starship, most of which weren't completed, unfortunately. In particular, Flight 10's planned profile will be very similar to Flight 9, but with Booster 16 and Ship 36. Oh wait, that can't be right. Oh, yeah, no, Ship 37 now, yeah. With the ship having completed its pre-flight testing last week, teams at SpaceX have reconfigured the pad from ship testing configuration to launch configuration. This has allowed them to roll Booster 16 out to the pad to be installed ahead of flight. Once the ship is ready, it'll get loaded with its Starlink satellite simulators and roll out to the pad to meet with the booster ahead of flight. Okay, so what are all of those objectives and things planned for Flight 10? Well, let's take a look first at the booster. Now, if you were hoping for an amazing booster catch at the launch site, that ain't the plan for this one. Instead, SpaceX will run the same experiments that they did with Booster 14. This includes the controlled flip during hot staging, which is achieved by blocking a small portion of the vents on the hot staging ring. By doing this, it provides a slight push in a known direction, which also saves on propellant for return. Unlike Booster 14, though, SpaceX hasn't indicated whether Booster 16 will be doing a high angle of attack entry through the atmosphere. That was, in fact, what caused 14's demise, with the booster's fuel transfer tube suffering a structural failure that led to its subsequent explosion. So they'll probably try to push that entry, but not as hard as with Booster 14. For the landing burn, Booster 16 will try to test the off-nominal scenario that was tried with Booster 14. This will see the booster starting all 13 inner engines, then disabling one of the 3 centermost engines to simulate a scenario where one of those goes out unexpectedly during landing. The booster will instead try and use one of the 10 engines on the middle ring to compensate for that one. The booster will then shut down that engine and land with only 2 center engines. The landing burn will also be cut off at altitude, so it'll impact the water at high velocity and prevent another scenario like Booster 13, which floated in the water after splashdown and ended up in Mexican waters. Now, as for Ship 37, it'll attempt to carry out the same experiments as the previous few flights. This includes the deployment of 8 Starlink simulators from its payload bay, performing an in-space relight of one of the ship's Raptor sea-level engines, and going through re-entry, but this time in the right orientation. That re-entry will in itself be full of several experiments, the main one being the demonstration of the design changes to the ship's flaps for Block 2. We've seen ships re-entering already on Flights 4, 5, and 6, but they were all Block 1 vehicles. Block 2 features smaller flaps located closer to the tip of the nose cone and further leeward, preventing the plasma from hitting the seal between the flap and nose cone. Block 2 also features different heat shield tiles from Block 1 that are supposed to be tougher and less prone to cracking. These have also not been tested yet. As with the previous Block 2 flights, SpaceX is also flying different types of metallic tiles, including one with active cooling. Also, like previous ships, Ship 37's sides have been modified to support future ship catches. This includes flying with catch pins, receiving protective ramps on delicate structures on the sides of the ship, adding backup thermal ablative material, and tapering the edge of the heat shield leading to the leeward side of the vehicle. These features should enable future ships to not only survive re-entry, but also be caught by the tower arms for rapid reusability. So it's gotta be tested during an actual re-entry before bringing a ship to starbase from orbit. Lastly, also like on the previous test, SpaceX wants to stress test the aerodynamic controls of Starship. Therefore, Ship 37 will fly a more aggressive entry profile that will stress the structural limits of the aft flaps. And very much like Booster 14, don't be surprised if the ship breaks up during re-entry because of that. I mean, it wouldn't be a great outcome, but well, at least it wouldn't be unexpected like the last 3 times. Hopefully, if all goes well though, just a bit over an hour after launch, we should have Ship 37 floating in the waters of the Indian Ocean, and a bunch of little pieces of Booster 13 in the Gulf after a successful landing burn. After several unsuccessful flights of Starship Block 2, this flight needs to work. SpaceX engineers need to be able to gather the data that they've been waiting on for so long on all of those critical events that the ship is set to carry out during this flight. Not only that, Starship also has a bunch of goals in its very near future that are dependent on these experiments going well. It won't be able to deploy any payload if it can't get into orbit and demonstrate relighting of its Raptors in space. It also can't do any on-orbit propellant transfer demonstrations if the ship loses attitude control in orbit, or if it suddenly blows up on ascent. And there certainly won't be any full reusability if the ship can't demonstrate that it can go through re-entry. Additionally, there are at least 3 major programs at risk if Starship continues to not meet its goals. First, there's SpaceX's Starlink constellation. While Falcon 9 continues to launch the smaller V2 mini satellites, the large V3 Starlink satellites would greatly increase the capacity of the constellation and would allow SpaceX to serve more customers with a much better service. Second in the potential timeline is, of course, NASA's Artemis program. Starship is under contract with the agency to provide a Starship that will serve as the lunar lander for its astronauts. And, as you might have seen covered in recent episodes, China has made significant progress on its lunar program lately. So there's been a lot of public criticism about Starship's woes. And finally, there is of course SpaceX's own Mars ambitions. If Starship can't even go through re-entry on Earth or can't do simple tasks like keeping its attitude stable, then there's not much hope for a Mars mission either. And of course, this isn't to criticize Starship, but rather to put it all into context, just how much more important this mission is. It's not just another test, it's the potential for Starship to come back strong and finally move ahead instead of going backwards. The UK Space Agency has announced a new roadmap in collaboration with the Science and Technology Facilities Council this week called UK Space Frontiers 2035. The community-led program will shape the UK's vision for space exploration and research into astronomy, planetary science, and heliophysics. It mirrors the US National Academy's own decadal surveys, which will bring together scientific communities to prioritize space missions and research directions over the next 10 years. Researchers are invited to submit white papers and take part in regional workshops, while panels of experts will weigh up ideas. Independent feasibility studies will also rigorously assess whether proposed missions are both scientifically compelling and technically realistic. The project is designed to be inclusive, encouraging contributions from underrepresented voices and early career scientists. Now, these groups aren't generally involved in the high-level planning, but will likely be the ones carrying out much of the work in the coming decade. The UK Space Agency will be integrated into the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology from April of next year as part of the UK government's plan for change. The agency was founded 15 years ago in 2010, and while it'll now operate with enhanced efficiency and ministerial oversight, its name and brand will remain. The initiative is part of sweeping reforms designed to supercharge the nation's burgeoning space sector and will bring together the people who shape space policy with those who deliver it. The changes are intended to cut through red tape, reduce duplication, and improve both the efficiency and the visibility of the decision-making. The government's plan for change also launched over 60 industry-led recommendations aimed at streamlining regulations, particularly those regarding complex space activities such as in-orbit rendezvous and proximity operations. These reforms are seen as critical for the UK to tap into a projected £2.7 billion market in sustainable space infrastructure by 2031. According to the UK government, these changes could enable its space companies to capture up to a quarter of the global market for in-orbit satellite servicing, manufacturing, and the removal of orbital debris. Astroscale UK, D-Orbit, and ClearSpace have worked together with the Space Agency and the UK's Civil Aviation Authority to make recommendations on how to make sure that the rules keep pace with innovation. A second phase is now underway to stress test the group's proposals, and the work will support the UK's first active debris removal mission, dubbed Cosmic. This mission will use robotic arm capture to remove 2 inactive British satellites currently in orbit and is planned to launch by 2028. NASA's Psyche spacecraft is currently en route to the metal-rich asteroid of the same name and took a moment to look back and snap a rare portrait of home. The image was taken while the craft successfully calibrated its cameras and shows our Earth and Moon from around 290 million kilometers away. The pair appear as bright, sparkling dots against a starry backdrop in the Aries constellation, reflecting sunlight in much the same way that Psyche will when the craft reaches the main belt and its namesake asteroid in 2029. These long exposures, lasting around 10 seconds each, tested Psyche's dual multispectral cameras, giving us a view reminiscent of the iconic pale blue dot image from Voyager 1 in 1990. These results build on calibration tests earlier this year when Psyche turned its attention to Jupiter and Mars. The successful calibration reassures engineers that Psyche's instruments are tracking and imaging correctly. The craft suffered a valve obstruction in its primary xenon propellant line in April, causing NASA engineers to switch to a backup line. Psyche recovered full thruster operations by mid-June and is back on track to perform the planned Mars flyby and gravity assist in May of next year. Once it arrives, Psyche will study the surface of the asteroid in different wavelengths of light using filters and telescopic lenses. The mission aims to shed light on the building blocks of planets and perhaps on our own origins. This new image is a reminder that every time we look outward, we also gain a new perspective on home. The James Webb Space Telescope has made not one, but two recent discoveries, including a previously unknown moon orbiting the planet Uranus. The object, designated S2025U1, was spotted in February of this year in a series of long-exposure images using Webb's near-infrared camera. This small moon orbits around 56,000 kilometers from the planet's center in a nearly circular orbit between the orbits of moons Ophelia and Bianca. The moon is estimated to be just 10 kilometers in diameter. Its small size and faint signature likely explain why it wasn't spotted by NASA's Voyager 2 spacecraft when it flew by almost 40 years ago in early 1986. Voyager 2 gave us our first, and to date only, close-ups of the ice giant planet. Uranus has 28 known moons, of which 14, including this new one, are known as inner moons. These orbit very close to the planet, either inside or near its ring system, with orbits lasting less than a day, sometimes just a few hours. While this has yet to go through the peer review process, it's still a significant discovery. The International Astronomical Union will need to officially approve a name for the newly discovered moon, and it's a reminder that even in our own solar system, there may be new worlds still waiting to be found. Looking further into deep space, this week NASA announced that data from James Webb Space Telescope observations have revealed that the exoplanet TRAPPIST-1d lacks an Earth-like atmosphere. Astronomers have been studying Earth-sized planets like this one in a search for potentially habitable worlds beyond our solar system. These worlds lie in what's known as the habitable zone, or the Goldilocks zone, at a distance from the star where the temperature could be just right for life and where liquid water on the surface is possible. The TRAPPIST-1 system lies around 40 light-years away and was discovered almost 10 years ago by the TRAPPIST-South telescope in Chile. Follow-up observations by NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope and other ground-based observatories reveal the system contains as many as 7 Earth-sized planets. This set the record for the most Earth-sized rocky planets discovered around a single star. TRAPPIST-1d is the third planet from its red dwarf star, which it orbits in just 4 of our Earth days. This is because the exoplanet is just 2% of the distance to its star than Earth is to our Sun. Webb's near-infrared spectrograph failed to detect molecules such as water, methane, or carbon dioxide, which are common in our own atmosphere, but it may be that the planet has an extremely thin atmosphere, similar to Mars, which would make it difficult to detect. Alternatively, it may have very thick, high-altitude clouds, similar to those on Venus, which are blocking our detections. Further studies will be necessary, and there are still 4 other more distant planets in this system to observe further. The red dwarf star is quite volatile, with frequent flares that make the detection of atmospheric signatures challenging, but it's also the most common type of star in our Milky Way. Astronomers have been hopeful that if an Earth-sized world could maintain an atmosphere and potentially surface water here, then the chance of finding similar worlds throughout the galaxy could be much higher. Elsewhere in deep space, it turns out that asteroids Bennu and Ryugu are family. Now, you might recognize these names as both asteroids have been visited by a spacecraft that took a bit of the asteroid home for scientists to study. Bennu's sample was delivered to Earth by NASA's OSIRIS-REx mission in 2023, whereas Ryugu's sample, collected by the Japanese Hayabusa 2 mission, arrived here in late 2020. A study published this week in the Planetary Science Journal has shown that 2 of our solar system's most famous asteroids are siblings and may share a common origin. The pair appear to be members of a family of fragments from a much larger main belt asteroid called Paulana. Even though scientists have pieces of the asteroids available to analyze, the team studied the asteroids from afar. Using data from the James Webb Space Telescope, scientists from the Southwest Research Institute compared the spectral fingerprints of all 3 asteroids and found the similarity to be striking. It's now suspected that early in our solar system's history, a massive collision shattered their parent body. Bennu and Ryugu eventually drifted into near-Earth orbits, while Paulana remained the largest surviving chunk. In short, these carbon-rich castaways could be cousins from a cosmic catastrophe. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting in Japan, where Firefly has begun to explore a potential second international launch site for its Alpha rocket. To date, Alpha has launched 6 times from Vandenberg in California. Firefly is also planning to launch from the Wallops Flight facility next year and from Sweden's Esrange Space Center once the infrastructure there is ready. This month, Firefly signed a memorandum of understanding to study the feasibility of using Hokkaido Spaceport as an additional location for frequent launches. launches. The spaceport is situated in Taiki, around 820 kilometers north of Tokyo on Japan's northern island of Hokkaido. It currently has one pad, known as Launch Complex 0. This has been used 3 times to date by the Toyota-backed Interstellar Technologies for its suborbital Momo vehicle. Hokkaido has plans for 2 more launch complexes, including a vehicle assembly building and test facilities. These will support Interstellar's forthcoming Orbital Class 0 rocket, which is anticipated for 2027, with payloads already on the manifest for its maiden flight. A technology safeguards agreement between the US and Japan is underway, but would need to be concluded before Firefly can use the site. The Tokachi region has such famously clear skies and favorable weather conditions that locals even have a name for it: Tokachi Bear. With open sea to its east and south, it's an attractive launch location, offering a wide range of inclinations from low Earth to polar orbits. Meanwhile, in Canada, Nord Space has begun construction on its new Atlantic Spaceport complex in Newfoundland and Labrador. As we reported recently, this new facility will feature 2 additional pads for orbital launches. These will be used by Nord Space's forthcoming Tundra rocket, as well as international launch partners from the US and Europe. Its location offers launch inclinations from 46 to 100 degrees, giving access to a wide range of orbits. Formerly known as Spaceport Canada, the site will first support the launch of Nord Space's Taiga suborbital rocket, which could fly as early as next week. The window for Taiga's first commercial launch opens on August 25th, though it may be affected by road or power interruptions caused by the region's ongoing wildfire emergency. And now, on to spacecraft thrusters. The exploration company has found a supplier for the thrusters of its upcoming Nix capsule. The German company is working on a space capsule to deliver cargo to the ISS as soon as 2028. To steer and propel the spacecraft in space, it's partnering with US-based Agile Space Industries. True to its name, the company designed and tested a brand new thruster for the exploration company in no more than 10 weeks. Even though the exploration company has turned to an external provider for its spacecraft thrusters, the company is still working on engines of its own. In just the last few weeks, it's tested the thrust chamber for its Huracan engine, which will power the company's lunar spacecraft. What's more, the company also completed a series of tests with the pre-burner for its Typhoon engine, a methane-powered beast of an engine running the full flow stage combustion cycle, which the company reportedly wants to use in a bid for ESA's European Launcher Challenge. Between its own engines and the ones bought from Agile, it sure seems the exploration company is speeding up to make its ambitious plans a reality. This is your weekly space traffic report provided by Next Spaceflight. This week we had launches from all around the world, starting with a launch from China. A Changzheng 4C lifted off from Xichang to carry a somewhat mysterious satellite. It's the second of a pair, the first of which was launched in early July. Their mission patches line up, and when combined, they seem to show that the missions have something to do with fire and water. What do you think this mission is for? Let us know in the comments. Also from China, a Lijian 1, or Kinetica 1, launched 7 satellites from Zhochuan. 2 of the satellites marked the first international commercial payloads for CAS Space, as they're 2 tiny satellites for the Mexican company ThumbSat. And they're really tiny, coming in at less than 100 grams each. They're designed to test the company's imaging and communications technology. And if you're interested in how the ThumbSats are doing, the company released instructions on how to capture the satellite signals on its website. Over in Kazakhstan, we had the launch of the Bion-M No. 2 mission. This spacecraft is derived from the one that carried Yuri Gagarin into space on his historic flight, but this time it didn't carry cosmonauts, rather 75 mice, 1,000 flies, and other science experiments. Some of the mice have their genomes altered to be more or less susceptible to radiation. They'll spend 30 days in space, after which they'll be studied further on the ground. Russia also launched an Angara 1.2 with multiple classified military satellites. And continuing the theme of classified missions, a Falcon 9 launched the Boeing X-37B spacecraft for the US Space Force. The mission lifted off from Florida, and while most of it is classified, we do know that the spaceplane is outfitted with a payload to demonstrate laser communications between satellites, as well as a quantum inertial sensor to test navigating without GPS. And of course, a few batches of internet satellites went up this week. From China, a Changzheng 6A launched some satellites for the SatNet or Guowang constellation. And from California, Falcon 9 launched 24 more Starlinks on its 100th mission of the year. There will be another Starlink mission from California set to launch around the time this episode will be published. Then next week, we might have 2 more Starlink missions launching from Florida. If you're living on the East Coast, you might be able to see them, in which case you might also be able to spot a Cargo Dragon launch to the ISS. Over in California, a Falcon 9 is set to launch a bunch of satellites on a return to launch site mission, so prepare for sonic booms if you're in the area. Then there's the suborbital New Shepard NS-35 mission from West Texas. This mission won't carry any humans, but instead it's an uncrewed science mission carrying over 40 experiments for NASA, universities, and others. It looks like we'll also have a Changzheng 8A launch from China and an Electron launch from New Zealand. But the main event for next week will, of course, be Starship Flight 10. SpaceX is now getting Booster 16 and Ship 37 ready for their launch. As we're recording this, SpaceX is aiming to fly as soon as August 24th, but as always, that might be subject to change. So if you don't want to miss it or any other upcoming launch or spaceflight event, be sure to download the Next Spaceflight app on your phone or visit the website at nextspaceflight.com.
And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. We'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.